This is Seth at 62 Sales, and this is another one of our quick winter maintenance series. And packing your bearings, taking good care of the hubs and the bearings and the races and keeping them properly greased and the brakes adjusted is extremely important. Not only is it important, but it's safe. But I want to point something out here. So we're actually doing a bearing job, complete tear down to repack each of these. Now you may notice on this spindle you see some brown areas here, both in the rear portion and even on the front. Now if you look at the other spindle, you'll notice that it's polished, very shiny, and it's not burnt. That's actually what you're seeing over here. It is actually heated up. Okay, the bearings have heated up to a point to where it's actually burnt the spindle. Now I also noticed when I pulled the bearings out of that hub assembly, got them cleaned off, pushed through the parts washer, you can see some rust here, and they're also pitted. So we're actually going to go ahead and replace this wheel bearing so our customer doesn't end up on the side of the road. So let's get this replaced, get it repacked, and get that new hub assembly put on. Okay, so now we're going to actually have to replace what's known as the race on the bearing as well, because I was talking about earlier how this bearing has rust around it. Well, anytime you replace the bearing, you should also replace the race, because the bearings and the races actually kind of mate together over time. This is actually what's called the race here. Okay, this is what the new bearing rides within. It rides within that race. Okay, so we're actually going to have to knock out the old race on this hub and then press a new race in. It's important when you're doing this task that you have the proper tools. So this tool here helps to seat the race within the new hub. So let's get it tapped out, get the new one tapped in. That is the old race, and you can see on the old race how it's kind of burnt up on the inside. That's why we're going to press in a new race, since we're also replacing the bearing. So now that we have the old race out, we're going to press the new race in. So again, it's important to have the proper tools. This tool actually seats right in the race, then you pound it down. It's also important to make sure that the inside of the hub here is completely free of debris. You don't want any types of metal shavings, rock chips, pieces of rock down in there, etc., before you start beating in the new race. So let's get this race beat in. We'll get the bearings packed up, get it put back on. All right, we have the hub assemblies all cleaned out. They're ready for new grease. We've cleaned the bearings. We've completely run the bearings through the parts washer. Matter of fact, we replaced one of the bearings as well, as you saw in an earlier video. You also want to make sure that when you're repacking bearings, you have the correct seals, okay? The best way to measure these is with calipers, is the best way to find the correct seal. But just to double check that as well, you can also put the seal over top of the spindle here, and it should seat just snugly over that spindle. If it fits really loose, more than likely you have the incorrect seal. But again, you're packing bearings, you always want to make sure you have the correct seal. Let's get these packed up and get them put back together. Okay, the bearings are all repacked. They're seated within the drum assemblies. So what you saw there is we packed both of the inside just to make the best use of our time, help from cleaning our gloves multiple times. Now it's time to press in the seals or knock in the seals. These are calipers. These are the best way to measure seals and make sure that you do have the correct seal. Now I mentioned earlier, you may also want to slide the seal over the spindle just to make sure that it fits snug. let's get these new seals pressed in or hammered into the interior of the hub assembly here. Along with packing the bearings on this trailer, we're actually going to replace the brake assemblies or the brakes. Now, it's more cost effective enough to replace the entire backing plate versus simply replacing the shoes on the brake assembly. You get all new magnets, all the components are free and clear, no rust, brand new shoes. And it's also from a labor standpoint, it's more efficient and actually faster to replace the whole assembly. There's 2 wires here in the back that have to be reconnected. We use shrink tubes here at 62 Sales, shrink connectors, because these get a lot of wear and tear just from the debris coming off the roadway. So we're going to go ahead and get this bolted up and wired in so we can put the hub assembly back on. Now we have the bearings repacked. We're going to wrap up part 1 of our wheel bearing inspection and repack, which ultimately turned into a bearing job leading to replacing electric brakes, replacing one of the bearings as well. So that is the end of part 1. So stay tuned for part 2, where we're going to put everything back together and get this customer back on the road.